Hiya, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you're doing swell here. Here's another episode of the top 10 best films made by the greatest directors in cinema history. You bet your bottom dollar we are starting from 10 and then working our way up to number 1. And of course, ladies and gents, I have seen every film that is attainable by these artists, so these lists are passionately accurate. My good friends, it really does sadden me deeply, but at the same time, excites me to talk about a very, very underrated, unique, and ardent artist of cinema. Peter Bogdanovich. Born from a Jewish and Serbian immigrant family in 1939 in the beautiful city of Kingston, New York, Peter was already inspired by the moving pictures. He would go to the movies all the time as a kid. He then kept a file of index cards of all the films he saw. He went on to study at the legendary school itself, the Stella Adler Conservatory, taught by Stella herself. She would look upon him as the Golden Boy, in reference to the play Among Others by Clifford Odets that Bogdanovich would do in class. He actually revived Odets' The Big Knife off-Broadway, getting great reviews and found more of a flow of being a director rather than an actor. Not only that, he also became a film critic, doing many retrospectives on Orson Welles, Howard Hawks, John Ford, and Alfred Hitchcock, among so many, all of whom he had great personal relationships with. He was finally influenced to make the big move to LA with his wife at the time to get in film, and lo and behold, he would meet everyone's favorite film director and producer, Roger Corman. Roger Corman gave him his start, really, and I'll touch more on those details later, but just that background alone is unbelievably inspirational. I'm sure you all know how passionate I am about every artist I talk about here, but for some reason, guys, I have a sincere admiration for Peter Bogdanovich. He himself was an avid fan of the classics, and everything he incorporated in his films, he developed on his own and gained from his heroes that he personally got to know. What's really important to know about Peter Bogdanovich is that he was one of those pioneers of the new American cinema of the 1970s, along with Francis Ford Coppola, Martin Scorsese, George Lucas, Robert Altman, etc. More than anything, his films have such heart and soul, and in a weird way, as dark and deep as a couple of them are, they make you feel so warm inside. He did that because of his heroes. He just grew up watching classics like me. And so the flavor of a lot of his films really capture that essence of the American classic cinema that we all just felt so warm and fuzzy inside, but yet intrigued and invigorated. In my opinion, he is one of the most underrated artists in film that has ever lived. All right, let's go, darlings. Let's get to the top 10 best films directed by a true master, Peter Bogdanovich. Number 10, The Cats Meow. This was quite a fun picture, set in the roaring 20s surrounding the mysterious death of silent film producer Thomas H. Ince, which took place on William Randolph Hearst's yacht. Yes, that William Randolph Hearst in reference to Citizen Kane, which, side note, was not fully the inspiration for Kane. Orson Welles' words, not mine. Edward Herrmann is bumbly brilliant as Hearst. Kirsten Dunst is always incredible as Marion, Hearst's mistress, and Eddie Izzard as Charlie Chaplin? Who saw that coming? But he's fantastic in the role. Bogdanovich took the task of putting this original play on screen because Orson Welles apparently told him this story. Bogdanovich guides it very, very well, incorporating a lot of comedy of manners, farcical humor, and yet deep drama. It still definitely feels like a fun time when you watch it. So if you're a fan of Bogdanovich like I am, I think you'll really will enjoy this. Number 9, The Thing Called Love. The director's cut, most importantly. You're going to hear me call a lot of his films on this list the director's cut because, sadly, Bogdanovich has a lot of studio battles on his vision. And like Orson Welles, his films for the majority of the time had to be compromised. But thank God he was able to touch this one up with his own vision. I first saw the theatrical version when I was about 15, but then I saw the director's cut when I was 17 on DVD and loved it. It really does make a difference. Those scenes were definitely important. It tells the story of Miranda Presley, played by Samantha Mathis, who moves from New York to Nashville to become a professional songwriter. In the process, she meets James, played by River Phoenix, in his last film role. She also meets Kyle, played by Dermot Mulroney, and thus a minor love triangle begins. This film is indeed another small gem of Bogdanovich's filmography. Bogdanovich almost took an Altman approach and had the actors write their own songs. And they're really, really good, including good old Sandra Bullock's. She's delightful here in one of her breakout roles. The chemistry between everyone is so full of heart, and you know what's sad? This was the most financially unsuccessful film of the year. It came out in 1993, grossing only $1 million out of its $14 million budget. I guess you could say this was all due to the unfortunate death of River Phoenix, dying at the same time this movie was being released. But this film deserves a lovely cult following. Number 8, Targets. Peter's very first full-length film he directed and co-wrote. This was Peter's big-time break working with Roger Corman. For those of you who have seen this film, I'm sure it's very surprising to have this included in the top 10. But honestly, people, hear me out. Watch this film again. There is so much to truly admire of this film. I love this story of how this film was developed. So here we go. Corman gave Bogdanovich 20 minutes of footage from Corman's horrendous film, The Terror, starring Boris Karloff and Jack Nicholson, to use in Peter's next film, because Roger Corman gave Peter the opportunity, since he's been such a great almost apprentice throughout the whole filmmaking journey with Roger Corman, he decided to give him his own film to do. Peter was going crazy on how he was going to use 5 minutes of this piece of crap, let alone 20. He was shaving one morning and as a joke thought to himself, what if Boris Karloff, who was going to be the star, was an actor? And the scene was he was just watching footage from the film, The Terror, and turned over to Corman and said, that is the worst movie I've ever seen in my life. But then he thought, well, that's actually not a bad idea. And then a friend of his told him to make a film about Charles Whitman, the sniper in Austin, Texas, who went on a killing spree, killing 17 people. The plot then became Boris Karloff playing an aging actor who is famous for gothic horror B movies, and he wants to end his career while at the same time a sniper is on the rampage, thus painting the theme between what is real modern horror and in the 60s. That was definitely more horrifying. This film was not really a hit when it came out, but critics did like it, and it put Bogdanovich on the map to do bigger and better things. Bogdanovich also pops in a beautiful acting performance as Karloff's writer and director. Doesn't he look so dapper? I mean, look at that sweater. It's beautiful. But seriously, folks, a lot of people give this film crap. I don't know why. Is it because of how low the budget is? I mean, honestly, that's where the magic really shines. The sequences where the sniper is just loading his rifle, aiming, we look through the scope, and then firing are just so gripping and so tense and just so terrible. Terrible in such a effective and heart-wrenching way. What helps is that there is no score or music throughout this film, which just increases the tension. If you've seen this and pooped on it, or if you haven't seen it, I say give it another shot. No pun intended. Number 7, Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, Running Down a Dream. The rockumentary all about the legendary band Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, from the humble beginnings to Tom Petty's recent times in 2007. Honestly, ladies and gents, this is one of the greatest rock and roll documentaries I have ever seen. It's really the length of a miniseries, being 4 hours and 19 minutes long, but it is so worth it, guys. When Bogdanovich came across this project, he was selected by Tom Petty himself to helm it, because Tom Petty wanted a respectful director to take care of this documentary the way it should. And who better than Bogdanovich, who is no stranger in doing documentaries. When Bogdanovich got a hold of it, he said, "Who's Tom Petty?" He didn't know who he was, so he listened to his music. He liked it, and after he met Petty himself, Bogdanovich was on board immediately, because he said they talked literally for like 4 hours and said, well, this is exactly how we'll do it. Just tell your story, just like how you told me. Bogdanovich was really giving and precious with really letting the leads of any picture he did give their heart and soul. And in this documentary, you definitely get a lot of heart and soul from Tom Petty. I liked some of Tom Petty's music when I was growing up, but it wasn't until I saw this documentary where I really respect and admire Tom Petty for who he was as an artist and as a human being. He was just an honest, fun-loving, passionate, collaborative artist whom everyone loved because he made everyone feel great and respected. He did so much for musicians in the business, battling for their own creative control. Sincerely, after watching this rock doc, guitar teachers need to teach their students more about Tom Petty because knowing the man now and his artistry, I love his music much more than I did. And Bogdanovich really implemented that change in me. For his work on this film, Bogdanovich, Tom Petty, and the Heartbreakers won a Grammy for Best Rockumentary. And I say, where's at least the Oscar nod for Best Documentary? Number 6, Saint Jack, the first of a couple comeback films for Bogdanovich in the late 1970s. This film stars Ben Gazzara, a true dear treasure, as Jack Flowers, an American hustler who decides to open up a brothel in Singapore to make a great fortune during the backdrop of the Vietnam War. He then is basically forced to open a brothel for the R&R activities of the US soldiers on leave in Singapore, which really complicates things. This film is very engaging and, like I said, this was really a return to form for Bogdanovich. He has said that his previous films didn't really feel like his because studio control. But when he just shipped himself off to Singapore, he felt free to go back to basics and yet give his own style. He had 3 flops in a row, so this film was important for him to bring a genuine spirit about it. He and Howard Sackler wrote this film as they went on in Singapore, even though it is based on a novel by Paul Theroux. But you feel something so real about this film. Ben Gazzara, of course, is brilliant as Jack Flowers, and I can't wait to cover him on this channel as well, because he really is an underrated artist. Denholm Elliott as the auditor that travels to Singapore to help him is a laugh riot, of course, as always. And again, Bogdanovich's cameo as a playboy who educates him on the term hooker. Always fun. Bogdanovich really had an issue from the Singaporean government, obviously, filming this because of the subject matter, depicting Singapore as a sleazy, corrupt country, which actually banned this film. I mean, it wasn't really his intention. I guess it just kind of came off that way within the writing. The cherry on top of this film is the transvestite sex scene with Goldfinger playing in the background. Utterly epic. Number 5, Mask. This is one of the most heartfelt and soulful films Bogdanovich has ever made, even though it was such a problem child. At first, Peter only took the job of directing because he was broke as a joke, and he needed the money. But then he decided it was the best thing to do because of the death of his girlfriend, Dorothy Stratton, who was very fascinated by the story of the Elephant Man being an outsider. So the real reason Bogdanovich took the directing role was to pay tribute to her. It tells the story of Rocky Dennis, who was a real person with a rare craniofacial condition called, excuse me if I get this pronunciation incorrectly, but craniodiaphyseal dysplasia. Rocky Dennis is forced by his mother to be a traveling biker family, so Rocky never really makes friends, but now, being 16 years old, he's developing more of a backbone. His mother, played by Cher, is a junkie and obviously struggles with being a good mother and satisfying her own pleasures with the luscious Sam Elliott. As said before, this film has so much heart, with Eric Stoltz being a spiritual force. The scenes between he and Laura Dern are so lovely as well, and the scenes with Cher, oh. What made this very problematic, though, for Bogdanovich was the relationship between he and Cher, as well as with the studio. First off, Peter thought she was just on edge the whole time, and they apparently had some creative differences. Peter fought for Cher to be in the movie, against the studio's wishes, actually. But she came out successful in this film, winning the Cannes Film Festival Best Actress Award. Then the battle with the studio was raging on with the music. The real Rocky Dennis was in love with Bruce Springsteen music. And Peter got the okay from Springsteen to use his music. But for some reason, the studio switched out the Springsteen at the last minute and substituted it with Bob Seger's music. Now, I love me some Bob Seger, but I agree with Bogdanovich here. Bruce Springsteen fits so much better within the narrative of this story. Bob Seger's music just makes it a little sadder, whereas Bruce Springsteen's music makes it a little more inspirational. Springsteen's music really makes the film more uplifting, especially the use of Badlands. Bogdanovich ended up suing Universal Pictures for $10 million for breach of contract when it was agreed he would have final cut. But a bad mistake that turned out to be. He dropped the suit since it was a no-win for him anyway. The theatrical release has Bob Seger's music, and it was still a huge hit, winning the Oscar for Best Makeup, of course, and thankfully, years later, he was able to recut it in his own version with Springsteen's music, which is 10 times better and honestly, like I said, more inspirational. So that's the real version that's at number 5. Number 4, They All Laughed. This may be surprising for a lot of people, but I don't care. This film has such a history, let me tell you. This came out in the heartfelt year of 1981, set in the beautiful springtime of Manhattan. The plot, well, I hesitate to say if you can really call it a plot, but it is involving 3 detectives, Blaine Novak, who co-wrote the film, Ben Gazzara, and John Ritter, following these beautiful women played by Dorothy Stratton and Audrey Hepburn. And Gazzara and Ritter end up falling in love with these women. This was absolutely a joy for the cast and crew to film, because it's springtime in Manhattan. How could it not be gorgeous? The cast looks like they are having an absolute ball, and not in the way where the film sucks. You know, because people can say a film like, oh, it looked like they were having fun up there, in which the film actually sucks, but no, they are actually having fun here. The film apparently saved Ben Gazzara's sanity because he was going a bit off the deep end with depression before making this film, and reuniting with Hepburn after they had an actual affair in the 60s was a lovely time, apparently. John Ritter is basically playing Peter Bogdanovich here, but he is always wonderful. I love John Ritter so much. The film just has the aura and breath of joy surrounding it, which is why it is so high for me. Keep in mind, the 1970s was such a decade of such violence, corruption, mayhem, anti-heroes, drugs, sex, etc., which we all know, and a lot of those movies taking place in NYC, showing how dirty, dark, and scary it can be. But this film is on the opposite spectrum, showcasing New York's beauty and fun qualities. This film is also a very, very deep and personal film for Peter. Peter fell in love with Dorothy Stratton, one of the stars, who is also a Playboy model. She had a husband who she said had been wanting to divorce because of his manipulative and abusive actions. Peter was on cloud 9 having Dorothy in his life, who would, like I said earlier, inspire him to direct Mask. But in post-production of this film, Peter got a phone call from Hugh Hefner, giving him the news that she had been murdered by her husband, Paul Snider. Peter collapsed. It devastated him from the inside out. He was still slightly a pariah in Hollywood at this time, and only a handful of people reached out to him to give their condolences. He was clenching his fists trying to finish this film. Seeing Dorothy's face on every frame in the cutting room was just devastating. Positive things is that Frank Sinatra allowed Peter to use 5 of his songs, including Theme of New York, New York, all for just $5,000, where originally that all would cost $75,000 or more for each song. Can you believe that? Peter was so touched, obviously. Once it was finished, he hated how the producers were advertising it, and major studios didn't even want to release it because they thought Dorothy's death would bomb it. So Peter took the boldest move yet. He will distribute the film himself with his own movie. Everyone told him not to do it, but he went with his gut to do so anyway. And unfortunately, the film did in fact bomb, putting Bogdanovich in financial ruin, filing for bankruptcy. It became one of those examples of films like Cruising, Heaven's Gate, and One from the Heart, where the director-driven studio films of the 1970s would come to an end, not allowing directors to control the films they finance. But now, it has achieved such a cult status, being one of Quentin Tarantino's top 10 favorite films ever, claiming it a masterpiece. Noah Baumbach and Wes Anderson also claim this film as being one of the biggest inspirations for their films, and the shot style as well. because of its naturalistic breath of life style. Peter claims it was the happiest time of his life making this film, alongside it being the saddest time of his life. He went on to write the fantastic book, The Killing of the Unicorn, which features the making of this film with Dorothy, which is, my goodness, it's very heartbreaking and yet an inspirational read. With all the scars Bogdanovich received of this film, it is still his own personal favorite film he has ever made in his whole career. Number 3, What's Up, Doc? A classic screwball comedy, which I am so glad a lot of people are rediscovering now. This came out only a couple months after Peter's first big hit, The Last Picture Show. So he was already riding high when this movie was released. This stars the wonderful Barbra Streisand and Ryan O'Neal, in the vein of Hepburn and Grant from Bringing Up Baby. O'Neal is a music professor who bumps into a playful nymph of some sort, played by Streisand, and they go on a farcical calamity ride with each other, while at the same time, a woman has her jewels stolen, and a government whistleblower arrives with top secret papers, which was a play on the Watergate scandal, and the Pentagon Papers, etc., basically leading back to a MacGuffin of 4 plaid-colored overnight bags that cause so much confusion, craziness, and hilarity. It is without a doubt a dear tribute to the classic screwball comedies of the 30s and 40s. Streisand and O'Neal are wildly hilarious together, but Madeline Kahn, oh my god, she steals the whole show, as she always does. Streisand and Peter had a wild time collaborating since she said she's never been directed before. Peter's like, really? William Wyler, the Oscar-winning director, didn't direct you in Funny Girl? She's like, nah. So Bogdanovich gave her notes on a certain line. Barbara fired back, you giving me line readings? Peter said, well, I just think it will make more sense and gives it a little nuance to it. Barbara also sings As Time Goes By in the movie, and Peter says, on this lyric, why don't you hit the word can? On that you can rely. Why don't you hit can? Now you tell me how to sing the fucking song? So much fun. Streisand actually sought out Peter to do a movie together because she saw The Last Picture Show, and she said, I want to do a drama with you. And Peter said, well, I just did a drama. I want to do a comedy. What kind of comedy? Screwball comedies, remember those? That was such a good line that it became the tagline for the film. They did some craziness in this movie with a spoof on the movie Bullet, with the car chase scene through San Francisco, causing some serious damage on the steps of the Alta Plaza Park, which they did not receive permission for, but God bless the stunt people of this film. This film was the second big hit of his career in a row of 3, grossing $66 million off of a budget of $4 million. My God, can you believe that? Can you believe the faces on the studio heads of what they must have been thinking? Even in the darkest time of the 70s, people loved to see a screwball comedy. With a great tribute to a classic line, Barbara says, love means never having to say you're sorry. Blank, 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 blank. Ryan says, who is also the star of Love Story, Where That Light Is From, that's the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Number 2, Paper Moon. I love this film. I love it, I love it, I love it, I love it. This was the 3rd hit for Bogdanovich in that row of 3. Came out in 1973. It wasn't too big of a hit, but it was for the audience, for sure. Now it is considered a classic. Based on the best-selling book Addie Pray by Joe David Brown, it tells the story of Moses Pray, played by Ryan O'Neal, a con man portraying himself as a traveling Bible salesman who finds out a woman he had been with had died, and he becomes a slight guardian of the woman's daughter, or at least takes upon himself to take care of her. Good old Addie Pray, played by Tatum O'Neal, Ryan's own daughter. He takes $200 as a beneficiary money, but Addie knows it's her money since Mo says he's not her pa. After a hard negotiation, he agrees to pay her back the $200, and they go on the road together selling Bibles, all set during the Great Depression. It's funny to say, given the fact that the leads are actually father and daughter, but their chemistry together is just masterful and so damn funny. Yes, their personal history is so sad, but we're talking about the film here, okay? Put that aside. There are so many scenes I can still quote backwards and forwards, especially that diner scene. I want my $200. I want my money. You can feel it almost inspired the great Will Ferrell internet scene with Pearl. Pearl, you're drunk again. I want my money! This film is expertly shot by Bogdanovich, especially with Laszlo Kovac's beautiful cinematography. This DP is royally underrated as well, side note. Bogdanovich indeed had a blast filming this, but he was also miserable filming this as well, since he himself had 2 daughters, his ex-wife was still the production designer, and it was quite difficult directing Tatum in her first role ever, which won her the Oscar for Best Supporting Actress. Even though she is clearly the lead here, this film moves so well. And Bogdanovich and screenwriter Alvin Sargent had to rewrite so many things for the film that are different from the book, including the title. I just love this story. Peter always looked up popular songs at the time period of which his films were being made in, and a certainly lovely song called Paper Moon was a big one, and Bogdanovich thought that would be a great title. The studio said, no, it makes no sense. But he's like, but it's a great title, isn't it? He's like, the producers are like, no. So he calls up his dear friend and mentor, Orson Welles. And he says, Orson, you got a minute? Orson says, I'm cutting. What do you want? Just tell me what you think of this title. Paper Moon. A short pause, and Orson said, that title is so good, you don't even need to make the picture, just release the title. Brilliant. He then calls up his screenwriter, Alvin Sargent, and asks him to put in a scene where Addie is at the carnival with Mose, and she wants to take a picture in one of those cardboard cutout paper moons with him. Sargent says, why? Peter says, so we can call the frickin' thing Paper Moon and the studio won't say no. There are so many brilliant scenes in this film, but the one that gets talked about is, of course, that long shot of Tatum and Ryan in the car, driving over the argument of giving money to poorly people, and then dropping her off at the depot, and then running out of Bibles. It's a good 2.5 minute shot, but a lot of fast dialogue. Plus, the business of Tatum getting the box, then grabbing the map, folding it out, folding it back up. Peter said it took 2 days and 39 takes to film this one scene, and he didn't want to chop it up at all. He later said he thinks that's what won her the Oscar. The fact that she was able to sustain long dialogue in a single shot. Many male friends of mine who have daughters have told me that they just love showing this movie to their daughters, even though it has such a subliminally sad ending. Because Mose is so bad for Addie. He's such a bad example. And even he knows he shouldn't be taking care of her. But she doesn't want to leave him. It brings a father and daughter together. Paper Moon, a very underrated classic, I must say so myself, and I'll be honest, it even rivals my number 1 pick personally. Now, folks, here are some honorable mentions. She's Funny That Way, the last feature fiction film made by Bogdanovich, which was originally going to be called Squirrels to the Nuts. I wish that title stuck. Executive produced by Noah Baumbach and Wes Anderson, amazingly enough. It's a funny little screwball comedy as well, written by Peter and his second ex-wife, Louise Stratton, sister of Dorothy Stratton. Yes. He was given judgment on this for years. But this film, it's a classic case of a playwright's new film project. But can he stay focused with a love triangle unraveling before him? It stars Owen Wilson, Rhys Ifans, Will Forte, Imogen Poots, and Jennifer Aniston, who is fantastic in this. Yeah, this film got messed up in distribution and didn't get the credit it surely deserves, but it truly is a lot of fun. Daisy Miller, Peter's 5th film that he made after Paper Moon, that really was swept under the rug because people thought he was just doing this movie for his girlfriend and star, Sybil Shepherd. It is an 1.5-hour adaptation of Henry James' classic story of Frederick Winterbourne, an upperclassman who becomes very fascinated in Annie Miller, known to most as Daisy, a privileged, free spirit of a young woman on a grand tour in Europe. The conflict of the film is his urge to combat his feelings for her. This movie is very honorable, mainly because this was among the first of those classic 19th century novel adaptations before the Merchant Ivory series films, which exploded in the 80s. And this came out in the heart of 1974. It was nominated for an Academy Award for its costume design, and on the National Board of Review's top 10 lists. But critics still sniffed it away because of apparent tabloids of Peter and Sybil. Peter recalls his producer in the screening room after they finished watching it, and Peter asked him, "So what do you think?" The producer said, "It was okay." Just okay? Producer said, "What do you want me to say? You're Babe Ruth and you just bunted." To me, it is definitely an important piece of work made by a director who is truly at the height of his powers. Noise is off. Sardines, Sardines, one of the greatest comedy plays in the history of theater, adapted by Bogdanovich, which moves pretty slowly, but Michael Frayn's writing here is never going to be tarnished. You have Michael Caine, John Ritter, Denholm Elliott, Carol Burnett, and Christopher Reeve, at least just having a grand old time. Yes, if you're a huge fan of the play, like I am, you'll be slightly disappointed, but I still think this was such a valiant effort. It's still such a fun time. Directed by John Ford, a documentary and retrospective Bogdanovich did on the legendary film director himself, which he originally filmed and interviewed Ford himself back in 1971, but rounds it out with more interviews from other legendary directors, Steven Spielberg, Clint Eastwood, Walter Hill, in the year 2006. Also featured are interviews with Jimmy Stewart, Maureen O'Hara, and the Duke himself. This film is such a beautiful, beautiful homage to the master himself, chronicling his life, his eccentricities, and the life of his films. Gosh, the palette of his films are just so palpable. It's worth it alone for the most awkward and hilarious interview Peter has with Ford. Mr. Ford, can you talk about how you achieved this long tracking shot? With a camera. Are you aware about the similarities with this other style that you incorporated in your films? Cut. It's like trying to get your crusty grandpa to talk about his life stories and the detailed methodology on it. And a lot of those guys back then, they didn't spend too much time talking about it. They just did it. Just like a fish being asked how it is being in water. It's like, it's all they know. A beautiful tribute to the man that I highly, highly recommend. The Great Buster, a celebration. I really wish this one was much higher, just like all of them. God, they're all so great. Honestly, this is such a beautifully made documentary on the legend of silent classic films himself, Stoneface. Featuring interviews with Mel Brooks, Quentin Tarantino, Johnny Knoxville, Bill Hader, and Bogdanovich himself. I just love the editing and the fact that it is such a celebration of the man. And, spoiler alert, it ends on such a positive light, since Buster's last days weren't so very positive. But it pays such a great tribute to his work as an artist. Buster Keaton, I think, comes out of this documentary like such a bigger master than Charlie Chaplin. And it's always been a big rival as far as like who is the biggest inspirational physical comedian in silent films, Buster Keaton or Charlie Chaplin. I mean, hey, after seeing this documentary, I think you would have that same battle yourself. Amazing work here. Number 1, absolutely, it is The Last Picture Show. It seemed pretty obvious, didn't it? I agree with almost all of the rest of the world that this film is without a doubt a small masterpiece, resulting in 8 Academy Award nominations, 2 of the nods going to Peter for Best Adapted Screenplay and Best Director. I remember first seeing this film when I was about 16 years old because I knew it was an important work, released in 1971 during the whole new wave of American independent filmmakers who changed cinema since the collapse of the major studios. And I originally saw his director's cut as well. Thank God these were released promptly. I remember feeling this was just so damn depressing, telling the somewhat autobiographical coming-of-age stories of these high school kids growing up in Archer City, Texas. As I watched this film over and over through the course of time, I am just blown away with how damn beautiful this film is in every way, even the tragic events of each character. Sal Mineo, one of the greatest actors of the sensitive young man age, suggested this book to Peter for him to adapt and direct. And he thought about it and thought the themes were very reminiscent of lost innocence and hope, especially in a desolate town, which is very strong in this film. They actually filmed on location in author Larry McMurtry's hometown in Archer City, which the locals didn't like. Peter said working on this film was both rewarding and tragic at the same time. Because 1, this was the only film the crew didn't like him, he said. Because he paid most of the attention to the actors and ignored the crew, basically. This film is very, very much an actor's piece, and technical aspects are not really the focus here. Also famously, this was the film where he fell in love with his leading lady, Sybil Shepherd, and broke up his marriage with set designer Polly Platt. Yes, he has expressed a lot of regrets on this, but at least he and Sybil had a great and powerful working relationship with each other for about 7 years. Sybil's performance is divine and exquisite in this film. For it being her first role, that's incredible. All the performances are absolutely inspirational, especially Ben Johnson and Cloris Leachman's Oscar-winning performances here. Jeff Bridges and Ellen Burstyn also were nominated for Best Supporting, and it's just a phenomenal cast where everyone said they all got along so amazingly. They really put in the method to hang out with each other all the time as well, even carrying on in the Southern accents. Even though this is a phenomenal actors film, still, the technical aspects of this film are just gorgeous. The black and white Oscar-nominated cinematography. Oh, God, which was heavily suggested by Orson Welles. It's one of my favorite stories Bogdanovich tells all the time. Peter asked Orson, should I film it in black and white or in color? I really want to get that good picture quality like what you had in Citizen Kane. Orson said, you'll never get it in color. Well, yeah, but we have good film now in color. You'll never get it in color. Well, why is that, Orson? Because every performance looks better in black and white. Name me a great performance in color. Well, Peter wasn't going to argue with him, so he said he has to do it in black and white. As Orson also said, you know what I say? Black and white is the actor's friend. Which is so true. Black and white really accents actors' performances. Because with color, you can be so easily distracted from the utter brilliance and the storytelling at hand. The cinematography also adds to the emptiness and loneliness of this town itself. It really does feel so desolate and a picture of what living the Southern life feels like. There are so many damn scenes that are just heartbreaking and funny. Funny like the scene where Dwayne and JC come out of the motel room and Dwayne has a huge smile on his face telling they did it. They walk and she says, "Oh, quit prissing. I don't think you done it right anyway." And then the whole monologue with Sam the lion by the river. Jesus, Ben Johnson was such a treasure in this film. The music choices are brilliant with Hank Williams taking over the whole music that's only heard through the radio. It is only heard through the radio or a jukebox. It's incredible, the detail to music. I can go on and on all day about the beauty of this film, and it still remains a picture that continues to inspire me and bring my heart and discipline closer to movie magic. I still look at the performances as big-time inspiration for tackling scenes. Anytime I want to watch a good movie that will bring me closer and re-inspire me with the power of acting, as well as the power of directing, this film takes the cake for me. Peter was blown away by the reviews of this film, which one of them stated, and I quote, "It is the most impressive work by a young American director since Citizen Kane." How about that? To be compared to one of your mentors and idols, Orson Welles. What an honor. As stated before, Bogdanovich was not a perfect human being when it came to relationships. Even though I understand he was a great father and still a loyal companion, the story of Peter Bogdanovich is just very inspirational to me because in a way, I feel just like him, where a young aspiring actor who just loves movies and the art of movie making can grow to be a journalist, a film critic, to a writer, to an actual award-winning filmmaker in Hollywood, and then come full circle to the art of acting, which I'm sure a lot of you remember his amazing portrayal as Lorraine Bracco's therapist in The Sopranos, right? Oh, he's just brilliant in that. But also remember his other amazing film performances like Cold Turkey. He really was such a beautiful actor. I would suggest, if you want to learn more about Peter Bogdanovich, subscribe to The Plot Thickens, which was a podcast developed by Turner Classic Movies. Their very first season was the whole story of Peter Bogdanovich. It is absolutely beautifully told and beautifully done. It just makes me sit up on the edge of my seat and go, my God, if Peter Bogdanovich can do it, I can do it. And that's how I look at artists on this channel. Inspirational human beings who are just like you and I. They just put in the time and effort to build their dreams. I'll always love listening to Bogdanovich's stories, no matter how many times I've heard them. They always bring a smile on my face as kind of a lasting representation of classic Hollywood. Rest in peace, Peter Bogdanovich. I'm positive you and Dorothy were beautifully reunited again in heaven. That's all I have for today, folks. Please tell me, do you agree with my picks? What are your favorite films by this classic American auteur? Please comment like crazy. Tell me all. If you like this, yeah, click that likety button. Ring that bell so you can stay updated on more to come. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you all so very much for watching. And please keep the classics alive.